Welcome to the No Budget Indie Filmcast, where we dip into the independent film universe to highlight those little films that you might not have heard about elsewhere. Will you agree with our panel, or will our panel agree with each other? Tune in to find out. I am Milo Dennison, and with me, as always, is Claire Milan.
Hello.
And Carl Halvini.
Hello.
All right, Carl, what's on the agenda this week?
Film this week is The Mushroom Club, which is a documentary from 2005 about the bombing of Hiroshima. So obviously the film Oppenheimer is in the cinema now, and I would recommend this as a companion piece for it, although I actually haven't seen the film yet, but I've seen this documentary, and it is it's a very harrowing watch. So it was made by an American filmmaker called Stephen Okazaki. I presume he has some Japanese heritage in there. And he went to Hiroshima in 2005, and he interviewed people who had been alive at the time of the bombing and who survived. Not all the people who survived it well. After the initial bombing, there would have been maybe, I don't know, the estimates of 70 to 150,000 people were killed. And then there was then thousands of people died or were suffered from radiation, effects of radiation sickness after the war. Mushroom Club, which the title refers to, is it's a sort of an organization that was started by this journalist to get help and support from the Japanese government for people who are suffering had ongoing effects from the radiation. And I don't know if it's still going. I presume it is. I mean, this is nearly 20 years ago now, and we are coming up to, in a couple of years, will be 80 years. And I don't know if how many people will still be around, or if there are, it won't be probably not 20 years again. So it's important. These kind of films are important to get real life documentation of experience. And considering what's happening in the world today, it's an opposite reminder of what actually a nuclear war, what a nuclear bomb does.
I mean, it's weird. I think I'm the only one at this point anyway who's seen Oppenheimer, but I think there's an absolute renewed interest in this, and I was a bit ignorant. I didn't really know the history. Like, I knew there was an atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but I didn't really know the history. I hadn't heard about Robert Oppenheimer. But it's in the film, you don't really see the aftermath of what happened in Hiroshima or in Nagasaki. It's all focused on Oppenheimer. And I was so curious after we'd seen the film. And it's so harrowing. And this is a great choice, Carl, because it gave you kind of an insight into absolute horrific, unbelievable, like, devastation that this bomb caused. And I think one of the only buildings left standing is the one just behind me here, the kind of big dome place. And I recently studied Japanese, and I just have this love and appreciation for Japanese culture and the language. And like, my ambition is to hopefully go to Japan and visit Hiroshima, and go to the Peace Park and see these places, because it's so desperately sad. And you see it in the documentary, the fact people were vaporized. And in when they tested the bomb on the American soil, it wasn't the same exact bomb that was found in Hiroshima. So this is a complete experiment as well. The effect of it, the devastation, and it clearly showed in the documentary. The fact there was one point where like the outline of a human being was on the ground, and then the two disabled women who were best friends. It's so sad, like, that there is still, like, it affected pregnant women, and people lost their whole families, and and it just the whole thing about the Japanese society in the present day, the young people are kind of forgetting about it. And this was filmed, I think, 2005. So a lot of these people would have passed away. So it's desperately sad documentary, but really good eye opener as well, to see the effects of this horrific bomb, which I think wasn't really necessary. After looking up at all the history of it, it doesn't seem to be necessary. Like, why is this thing necessary, to cause this much destruction? But yeah, it's a very, very insightful documentary.
Yeah, totally. It's crazy that we've got the Ukrainian-Russian war going on right now, and Russia's like, we might use nuclear weapons, and you're like, you watch films like this, and it's like, why you shouldn't do that. And how they talk about in this film of like the kids in Japan nowadays are forgetting all about this. Instead of caring really about this memorial, they're riding around on jet skis and listening to J-pop and stuff. And and I think experiencing that history, knowing about it, really does make a difference in hopefully preventing it from happening. I was thinking about the Cuban Missile Crisis in between Russia and the U.S. in the 60s, and of course Khrushchev and Kennedy would have been alive at the time that this bomb was dropped, and so they, being in the leading positions of these two countries, were really aware of the effects of what happens with an atomic bomb and stuff. And I think part of that helped hopefully contribute to them not actually going to that next level with the war. And the fact that nowadays people, like this said, everybody's dying off, right? So people don't know this experience anymore. And human beings just love to war with one another. And at what point in time is the memory of this going to be so far gone that somebody is going to hit that button and launch another nuclear weapon? And it's horrible, of the effects, not just on the people fighting, but like this was dropped on two cities of civilians, right? And kills them, it affects their children. And the way the governments, that's one thing as well, they talk about this in the film, is the way the governments treated them afterwards. Instead of like helping them, they're studying them and researching them and the effects of the radiation, right? So you've got this old guy in the documentary who's taking care of his daughter, who has the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. And the guy's like, this is in 2005, right? So this guy's old, and his daughter's quite old. And he's making a living as a barber and not really getting any help from the government. Yet in the US, instead of helping victims of war, we just keep raising our Pentagon budget and spending more on fighting wars. So it's really very relevant that people should watch this film along with Oppenheimer.
And
like you were saying.
there's a little boy in it, and he went down to pick up a rock, and he survived, and his whole family were wiped out. And they had this animation, and they showed the effects of it, and that just it was like when you watch the animation and you see like the kind of their skin being literally melted away and then being vaporized. It's so shocking. And like in Oppenheimer, they don't show that, they don't show that side of it. And I just think it's just it's hard to comprehend. And the reason why they didn't go into their shelters, I think there was no alarm wasn't sounded because they only saw one plane. They only saw one plane, so they didn't realize that one plane would cause so much devastation. But the fact people were vaporized, like it's beyond comprehension. And it's so mad that how the Japanese American relations are, I think they're quite good now. But there must be, like, it's unusual that they could forgive the Americans for what they did. It's so unreal. And your thought goes through your mind, was it necessary? You can't, how can you justify it? You can't.
I mean, I know. Go ahead, Colin.
I was going to say, when I was growing up, sort of the threat of nuclear war was the big existential, threat, because they had the nuclear arms race, and that was the big fear And now you have climate change and I don't know, AI and various personalities. And it's sort of been pushed into the background. But you did, I mean, you talked about Kennedy and Khrushchev, uh, having been alive during the war. But there was also, we had Chernobyl in the 1980s. So we do know we have a more recent memory of what like radiation can do. And even in Ukraine now, there is this nuclear power plant, the Zaporizhzhia, and like there's been threats made against that, and they've actually been firing bombs at it. And I think there is, if this had happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there would have been, I think everybody would have been completely, out of their minds with worry. But I think nowadays it's almost like it's just another item on the news. Like people don't seem to give it the seriousness that it really deserves.
And I think like there are bombs in Oppenheimer. Like it was it they were talking about inventing the hydrogen bomb, which is apparently 1,000 times bigger than the atomic bomb, and Oppenheimer is very much against it. But there are bombs out there now that could destroy the whole world, and that's frightening, isn't it? It's just frightening. Like, they could destroy us all.
Yeah, multiple times.
Yeah.
Mutually assured destruction. So
yeah, mutually assured destruction, exactly what I was going to say. And yeah, the film was very powerful. I liked the way he did it. It was he just let the people speak. He let the images speak for themselves. He didn't try to impose any kind of narrative of his own. He didn't have to, I guess. And that guy you mentioned, who bent down to pick up the stone, that was amazing.
That's just unreal. Like, to think about that little tiny little. It's amazing he survived.
And he is the animator, and
Yeah.
he creates these comics, and he was saying in the film that people are almost giving out to him for continuing to go back to it, continuing to talk about it, to write about it, and he just felt that it was his duty, his moral duty to do so.
Have you guys seen that animated cartoon movie? The one that they showed clips from?
No.
Yeah, it's called Barefoot Gen. I think that's right, Barefoot. I was looking it up. So I have seen it actually a long time ago, and it is quite depressing. The animation and the story is so good. So I would highly recommend saying, "Oh, maybe we should add that to one of our no budget reviews." Actually, see if I can find it and see if it's online somewhere. I would highly recommend, because you just saw like those little clips in this.
Yeah.
So imagine an entire movie of that. Like, it's really quite harrowing and quite sad.
It's kind of, we do become desensitized to all this, and I think that's why it's so important that we still remember these things, and if this is what Oppenheimer has done for people to make them go out and see these parts of history. But apparently someone was saying to me earlier that they don't display the Japanese flag that much because they lost the war, someone in public or something. There's something like that. Maybe, I don't know if that's true or not, but there are very few Japanese flags around in Japan.
Okay.
Yeah.
It may be like they're afraid of nationalism, raising its ugly head again. So when you think about it, like the two countries who I think for a long period after the war, Japan and Germany, they took a very neutral stance, that they refused to send troops abroad, for instance, until the Afghan war. So it did impress upon the next generation. The horrors of war were impressed more so on the next generation of those two countries, particularly, rather than the victors.
Showed in the documentary the trucks going by, didn't they? Kind of propaganda. and the blacked out windows.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that was, yeah, it's fascinating and scary. And yeah, it makes you think a lot. Um, yeah, like to go through something like that as a country, and lose so many people and the devastation. Um, yeah, must like it's weird as an Irish, like lucky Ireland, I know we had our own little 1916 and War of Independence, but nothing like that. It'd be very strange, like if our grandparents went through it, you know. It's a very strange thing for Japanese people.
Yeah, and eventually people do forget. You know,
Mm.
it fades from memory, and that's why it's important to just keep reminding people. Mm.
All right, let's rate it. Oh, Claire, you want to go first, or you want me to go?
You can go actually, because it's a hard one. Actually.
It is a hard one. I'm impressed with the filmmaker Stephen Okazaki. Okazaki. He filmed it, directed it, basically did pretty much everything in it. So that's quite impressive. And especially because it's really just quite simple. Like you said, it's just talking to the camera and letting images tell the story. Um, I don't think it really taught me anything I didn't already know, but that's okay because it's still good to have this refresher as a reminder. So I'm going to go 4 stars.
Yeah, for me, he let the people and the city basically speak for themselves. And yeah, it was filmed in 2005, so obviously it looks a little bit dated. But it really hit home, especially watching that little cartoon bit. So I'm going to give it 4 stars.
Okay. Well, I think it was, it was very well made, really. You could probably, from a pure technical filmy point of view, you could say, yeah, it hasn't stood the test of time, but that's unfair. I don't know. I can't think of any reason. I can't think of any way he could have made it better, to be honest. So I'm going to give it 5 stars.
There you go, no budget audience. We really enjoyed this film and would highly recommend that you check it out. It's called The Mushroom Club. Let us know what you think. Leave a comment, or you can always reach us on our social media channels at the No Budget Show. I'm trying to remember what it was, at No Budget Show on Instagram, X, or Facebook. See? And with that, we'll say see you next time and goodbye.
But
Not Twitter anymore.